I have always known since I was little that love comes with conditions. Even at the age of 45, as I sit by my window watching the autumn leaves fall, I can still feel the difference from my childhood when my mother Diane's eyes were on my sister Vanessa instead of me, when her smile was directed at me compared to when it was not. There were stark differences in kindness, interest, and pride that even a small child could detect. Rebecca, you're strong, so you'll be fine. That was my mother's standard phrase, uttered while her attention was already drifting toward my sister. Strong? I would think to myself, feeling anything but. She used those words to keep me at a distance and justify treating only Vanessa as special. That label, strong, became both my armor and my prison. But after decades of life, I finally realized true family isn't just about blood relations. The revelation didn't come easily. It was earned through tears, disappointment, and eventual growth. What makes a family are the bonds formed from love, respect, and understanding, qualities I never found in my childhood home but discovered later in life. This is the story of my journey to find my true family. When I was 3 years old, my parents got divorced. First in my memory, my father Thomas and mother Diane were always arguing. It was a fragmented scene, but I vividly remember their voices filled with anger and sadness, echoing through our small house while I hid under my covers. Rebecca, your father and I can't live together anymore, my mother said, her face a mask of determination rather than sadness. But I will always be with you. That promise quickly faded like morning mist in sunlight. She took me back to her parents' house, and there she met Howard, who would become my stepfather. At first, he was kind to me, offering me candies and patting my head when my mother was looking. But when she turned away, his smile would vanish. Even as a child, I sensed the falseness in his attention. After my mother moved out over my grandmother's objections, I, as a child, had a bad feeling that settled in my stomach like a stone. But Mom, why can't we stay with Grandma? I asked, clutching my favorite teddy bear as the movers carried our belongings to Howard's house. Because we're starting a new life, Rebecca, she replied, not meeting my eyes. A better life. Soon after, my mother got remarried, my sister Vanessa was born, and my premonition proved right. Everything about our life changed, and the change was not in my favor. Vanessa's birth. Vanessa's birth marked a turning point in our family's history. I was only 4, but the day remains etched in my memory with painful clarity. Look, Rebecca, my mother showed baby Vanessa to me, her face glowing with a joy I rarely saw directed at me. This is your sister. Isn't she beautiful? Indeed, she was beautiful. Blonde fuzz and blue eyes, the same color as Howard's. I will never forget the expression that appeared on Howard's face at that moment. It was filled with pure joy and pride, an expression he never showed when looking at me with my black hair and brown eyes that reminded everyone I wasn't his biological child. Perfect, he murmured, cradling Vanessa with reverence. Our daughter is perfect, our daughter. The emphasis on our hung in the air like a wall between us. Even as a young child, I felt something was off about that phrase. I intuitively understood that I was not included in that sacred circle of our. For months, I became a forgotten presence in the house that was supposed to be my home. My mother and Howard were all about Vanessa. The living room walls that once held a few pictures of me were gradually replaced with countless photos of Vanessa's milestones. Mom, can you help me with my homework? I would ask, standing in the doorway of Vanessa's nursery, where my mother spent most of her time. Mom is busy right now became the refrain I heard day after day, sometimes accompanied by an irritated glance that made me feel like I was intruding. Vanessa's feeding time, Vanessa's bath time, Vanessa's bedtime. Everything revolved around Vanessa, while I learned to fade into the background, to be invisible, to be strong, as my mother always said. A forgotten birthday. As the new family structure formed, my place gradually shifted to the periphery. In the eyes of my mother and Howard, Vanessa was always the center of the family constellation. She was doll-like with golden hair and blue eyes, a mirror image of Howard, which only served to emphasize how much I didn't belong. On my 6th birthday, a week before Christmas, I woke up with the innocent excitement that only a child can feel. I had been dropping hints about a bicycle I'd seen in a store window, painted my favorite color of red. I came downstairs in my best dress, expecting some acknowledgement of my special day. My mother bought a small cake later that afternoon, placing it on the kitchen table with a distracted air. There were no decorations, no balloons, and no party. The reason, she explained while checking Vanessa's temperature, was that Vanessa had caught a cold. But can't we still have a small celebration? I asked, my voice small as I watched my mother's attention fixed on my sister. Rebecca, don't be selfish, Howard chided from the doorway. Your sister is sick. You should be more considerate. My present was a single book, not wrapped, just handed to me with a hasty happy birthday from my mother as she rushed back to Vanessa's side. I retreated to my room and read that book from cover to cover, finding escape in its pages from the reality of my home life. However, a few months later, Vanessa's first birthday was an entirely different affair. The house was filled with balloons and gifts. Relatives and friends I barely knew crowded our living room, cooing over my sister while I stood in the corner, feeling like a stranger in my own home. You're big enough now that you don't need this kind of thing, my mother told me when she noticed my quiet observation of the festivities. Her dismissive words cut deeper than she knew, and I felt my heart crumple like paper in a fist. I had become like an accessory to my sister in the family drama, where Vanessa was the star and I was a silent supporting character expected to blend into the background. A glimmer of hope, but there was a slight glimmer in my life. The only one who truly saw my existence was my real father, Thomas. Even after the divorce, he continued to be involved with me, though his presence was like a shadow, there but not openly acknowledged in our house. He coordinated with my grandmother to meet me secretly, always finding ways to be part of my life despite my mother's attempts to erase him from it. He would attend school events that my mother never attended, sitting in the back row, his face beaming with pride when I received an award or performed in a play. I vividly remember the morning I met my father secretly in the park when I was 9 years old. The leaves were beginning to change color, painting the park in hues of amber and crimson. We sat on a bench tucked away in a quiet corner, safely hidden from the main paths where someone might recognize us together. He bought me ice cream, chocolate, my favorite, even though the autumn air was crisp and cool. His hands looked tired with calluses I hadn't noticed before. Later I would learn why. It's a secret from Mom. He winked, his eyes crinkling at the corners in a way that always made me feel safe. Despite the weariness evident in the shadows beneath his eyes, his smile was genuine. Why don't you come to see me? I asked, licking my ice cream and watching a squirrel dart across the path. The question had been burning inside me for years. His eyes clouded with sadness, like the sky before rain. Your mother won't let me, but I promise, Rebecca, he said, gently squeezing my shoulder. I'll be by your side as much as I can. I looked down at my shoes, gathering courage. Mom and Howard are always about Vanessa, I blurted out, the words tumbling from me like water breaking through a dam. They don't care about me. My voice caught on the last words, betraying the hurt I tried so hard to hide. My father hugged my shoulder then, pulling me close. The warmth of his embrace contrasted with the cool autumn air. You are a special child, Rebecca, my father said, his voice thick with emotion. Never doubt your own worth. His words became a small flame planted deep within my heart, warming me from the inside for many years, a light I could turn to during the darkest moments at home. In the silence of my room at night, I would often repeat his words to myself. You are special. You have worth. It was a truth I clung to when everything else told me otherwise. Academic refuge. From middle school, I found my place in academics. Studying became my refuge, a world where I could excel on my own terms, where my worth was measured by my efforts rather than by comparison to someone else. Immersing myself in textbooks allowed me to forget the loneliness at home, to escape into worlds of knowledge where I could be anyone, go anywhere. There I was special. I boasted the best grades in class and was recognized by the teachers who saw potential in me that my own family seemed blind to. Mrs. Bennett, my English teacher, often stayed after class to discuss books with me or recommend new titles that weren't on a required reading list. You have a gift for analysis, Rebecca, she told me once, returning an essay with a bright red A+ at the top. You see layers in these stories that many adults miss. In high school, surrounded by classroom walls adorned with college pennants and inspirational quotes, I began to dream of leaving home. While looking at university posters on the classroom walls, I imagined the free world that lay beyond, a place where I could reinvent myself, where no one would know me as Vanessa's sister or the quiet girl. I wanted to earn a scholarship to a prestigious university and start a new life, one where I would be valued for who I was, not dismissed for who I wasn't. I researched programs in literature and history, staying late in the school library to use their computers, filling out applications in secret. One evening at dinner, as Howard talked about Vanessa's latest dance recital, I mustered the courage to share my plans with my family. The words had been rehearsed in my mind 100 times, but they still caught in my throat as all eyes turned to me. Dreams dismissed, university? My mother frowned upon hearing my dream, her fork pausing midway to her mouth. The silence that followed felt heavier than the December snow piling up outside our windows. Where is the money for that? Howard is saving up for Vanessa's future. Community college should be enough for you. The dismissal stung like a slap. Vanessa was only 12, but a special account had already been set up for her future, a future deemed more valuable than mine. I glanced at Howard, who didn't even bother to look up from his plate. Vanessa has talent, my mother often said with pride shining in her eyes. She will surely become an artist. The implication hung unspoken in the air that I, by contrast, had nothing special to offer. But I've been working hard too, I weakly argued, hating the pleading note in my voice. My report card, straight as across the board, was still posted on the refrigerator, though half hidden behind Vanessa's crayon drawing. My teachers say I have potential for a scholarship. Howard scoffed, finally looking up. His eyes held that familiar coldness when they landed on me. Good grades alone won't get you through life, he said, waving his hand dismissively. Be realistic. Not everyone is college material. I nodded silently, pushing the food around my plate. I knew arguing was futile, like trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon. My dreams weren't even worth a proper discussion at this table. That night, alone in my room, I cried under the starry sky visible through my window as I felt my future dreams collapsing like a house of cards. The stars seemed so distant, so unreachable, just like my hopes of university. The tears came hot and fast, soaking into my pillow as I muffled my sobs with my hand, not wanting to give them the satisfaction of hearing me cry. A father's promise. When I met with my father over the weekend at our usual bench in the park, the words spilled out of me like a river breaking its banks. I told him about my dream of going to university, about wanting to study literature and history, about my longing for campus life where I could finally belong. I described the reaction of my mother and Howard, the casual dismissal that hurt more than outright rejection. Thomas listened silently, his face growing more serious with each word. The lines around his eyes deepened as I spoke, his hands clasped tightly together. When I finally fell silent, exhausted by my own emotions, he looked at me with such intensity that I felt seen, truly seen, for the first time in a long while. You should go to university, he said with quiet certainty. Not, you can try, or maybe someday, but a statement of fact, as if there was no question about it. But the money? I asked, voicing the practical concern that had been hammered into me by my mother and Howard. Don't worry, he said, reaching out to squeeze my hand. His palm was rough with calluses I hadn't noticed before. I'll figure something out. You focus on those grades and scholarship applications. I wanted to believe his words, to let hope flutter to life in my chest. But my father was not wealthy. After the divorce, he ran a small bookstore filled with worn paperbacks and the smell of aging paper. He led a modest life in a small apartment above his shop. I couldn't see how he could afford the tuition for university when he sometimes wore the same sweater for years until it frayed at the elbows. In my final year of high school, I studied desperately to win a scholarship, staying up late into the night, sacrificing weekends and social events. The effort paid off partially. I managed to secure a partial scholarship to the university of my dreams, but it wasn't enough to cover everything. Amidst my disappointment, I was close to giving up, to accepting the community college fate that Howard and my mother had laid out for me like an inevitability. A life-changing gift. One day close to graduation, my father took me to a quiet cafe downtown, away from our usual meeting places. The cafe was small and cozy, with jazz playing softly in the background and the rich aroma of coffee filling the air. Thomas seemed nervous, repeatedly running his hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized from my own moments of anxiety. There, in a corner booth away from other patrons, he handed me an envelope, his eyes watching my face with a mixture of pride and apprehension. Rebecca, this is for you. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside was enough money for me to attend a prestigious university for 4 years. Tuition, housing, books, everything. The amount was staggering. A small note was also included, handwritten in my father's neat script. For your dreams. I'm proud of you. Dad. How did you? I gasped, looking up at him in disbelief, the check still clutched in my shaking hands. He smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling, and explained he had been working 2 jobs for many years, saving up for my sake. In addition to the bookstore, he had worked as a taxi driver at night, spending hours on the road while I slept safely in my bed, never knowing the sacrifice he was making. Why go to such lengths? I asked tearfully, finally understanding the reason for the constant fatigue I'd noticed in his face, the calluses on his hands that hadn't come from shelving books. My father smiled gently, reaching across the table to brush a tear from my cheek. You have potential, Rebecca. You need a place to let it blossom. Tiredness was visible in his eyes, the kind that comes from years of double shifts and missed sleep, but it was overshadowed by his strong affection, a love that asked for nothing in return. At that moment, with the noise of the cafe fading into the background, I felt my father's unconditional love wash over me like a warm tide. He had made sacrifices for my happiness without seeking anything in return, without requiring me to be someone I wasn't, without comparing me to anyone else. In his eyes, I was enough just as I was. Confrontation. When I returned home, I walked in with a new confidence, the envelope tucked safely in my bag. The house was quiet except for the sound of the television in the living room. Taking a deep breath, I walked in to tell my mother and Howard about my decision to go to university. I've decided to attend Westfield University in the fall, I announced, my voice steadier than I expected. I got accepted with a partial scholarship. They looked up, surprised and visibly displeased. Howard muted the television, his expression darkening like a storm cloud. How will you get the money? My mother asked, her eyebrows drawing together in that familiar look of disapproval. She sat straighter on the couch as if physically bracing herself against my announcement. Dad will help me, I answered, and her face clouded over immediately. The mention of Thomas always had that effect, as if I'd spoken a forbidden name. Thomas? My mother's voice took on a bitter edge. That man can't afford it. He runs that dusty little bookshop that barely keeps him afloat. She shook her head dismissively, not even attempting to hide her disdain. He's been saving up for years for me. Working 2 jobs, I explained, feeling a surge of pride in my father's dedication. He was a taxi driver at night all this time. My mother's expression hardened, her lips pressing into a thin line. Howard snorted from his armchair, not bothering to hide his skepticism. He's just putting on airs, Howard said, his voice dripping with condescension. You'll be let down in the end. That man has never been reliable. Their words, meant to crush my spirit, only strengthened my resolve. For the first time in my life, I made my own decision without seeking their approval or cowering under their judgment. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating, like standing at the edge of a cliff and deciding to spread my wings. I'm going, I said simply. I've already accepted. That was the turning point in my life, the moment I chose myself and my future over their expectations and limitations. On the day I entered university, Thomas was there to see me off, his face glowing with pride as he helped carry my luggage to the dormitory. My mother and Howard did not come, citing Vanessa's dance recital as the reason, but that was no longer a pain for me. I had expected their absence, and in a way, it was a relief not to have their shadow cast over this new beginning. I was filled with the joy of new possibilities, standing at the threshold of a world that was about to open up to me. Dad, thank you, I said as I hugged him goodbye, breathing in his familiar scent of old books and aftershave. The words seemed inadequate for the gift he had given me, not just the money, but the belief in my worth. Live your own life, Rebecca, and call me sometimes, he replied, his eyes suspiciously bright. This is your time now. We laughed together, a shared moment of pure happiness that needed no further words. At that moment, I realized a true parent isn't just someone who is there at convenient times. It's someone who believes in me when no one else does, who sees my potential when others are blind to it, who makes sacrifices without keeping score. University life. At university, I discovered myself for the first time. Free from the shadow of comparison and neglect, I blossomed like a flower finally receiving sunlight after years in the shade. I studied literature and history with a hunger that surprised even me, my world expanding with each book I read, each lecture I attended. The campus became my sanctuary, the libraries with their endless rows of books, the quad where students gathered to debate philosophy under ancient oak trees, the dormitory where I formed friendships based on mutual respect and shared interests rather than obligation. I worked part-time in the university library while dedicating myself to my studies. The library, with its hushed atmosphere and the comforting smell of books, felt more like home than the house I'd grown up in ever had. Between the tall shelves and quiet reading nooks, I found peace that had eluded me for most of my life. That's where I met Nathan. He always visited the library at the same time every day, his arms full of books about environmental issues and sustainable practices. From my position at the checkout desk, I watched him over the weeks, his serious expression as he read, the way he carefully took notes, the occasional smile that transformed his face when he discovered something interesting. I was gradually drawn to his genuine passion and warm smile. There was something refreshingly authentic about him. He seemed comfortable in his own skin, unburdened by pretense or the need to impress others. After weeks of exchanging smiles and brief conversations about the books he was borrowing, I finally gathered my courage and asked him if he'd like to get coffee sometime. His surprised but pleased expression gave me a flutter of hope. "You want to know about me?" Nathan asked with a slight embarrassment when we sat down at the campus coffee shop the next day. He stirred his coffee nervously, as if unused to being the center of attention. "I'm a garbage collector," he said, watching my face carefully for a reaction. I was momentarily surprised. I had assumed he was an environmental science student, but quickly smiled. "So?" I replied, genuinely curious rather than put off. "Tell me more about that." Nathan seemed relieved by my reaction, his shoulders visibly relaxing. "Most people are put off by it, but I'm proud of my job. I'm making the environment cleaner every day," he said, his eyes lighting up with enthusiasm as he began to explain his work. "Actually, I manage my family's waste collection company. We're developing new recycling methods that could revolutionize the industry." I was captivated by his frankness and pride in work that many would look down upon. There was no pretense with Nathan, no hidden agenda, just genuine passion and integrity. As our coffee date extended into dinner, and dinner into a walk under the stars, I felt something I'd rarely experienced before, the joy of being truly seen and accepted for who I was. A real family, Nathan's family was just as warm and welcoming as he was. The first time he invited me to Sunday dinner at his parents' home, I was nervous. My experiences with family gatherings had left me wary and defensive, expecting judgment or indifference. Instead, I walked into a house filled with laughter and the smell of home cooking. Nathan's parents hugged me immediately, not the stiff, obligatory hugs I was accustomed to, but genuine embraces that made me feel instantly welcomed. "So you're the girl who's got our Nathan checking out poetry books," his father teased, his eyes twinkling with good humor. His mother swatted her husband's arm playfully. "Don't embarrass them, Frank," she scolded before turning to me with a warm smile. "We're just happy he's finally met someone special." Nathan's siblings teased him mercilessly throughout dinner, sharing embarrassing childhood stories that had everyone laughing, while treating me as a member of the family right away. There were no sideways glances, no whispered comments, no feeling that I needed to prove my worth. "More potatoes, Rebecca?" Nathan's mother would ask, already serving me before I could answer. "Tell us more about your studies," his father would encourage, listening intently to my response as if what I had to say truly mattered. The time I spent at Nathan's house gave me a sense of family for the first time. There was no conditional love there, just pure acceptance. I found myself looking forward to those Sunday dinners, to being part of their easy banter and genuine affection. It was a revelation. This was what family could be, should be. Even after graduating from university and finding a job at a publishing house, Nathan and I continued to respect and support each other. Our relationship deepened as we discovered more about each other's dreams and values. It turned out Nathan was not just a garbage collector in the conventional sense. He was managing a waste collection company that he had taken over from his father, transforming it with innovative approaches to recycling and environmental conservation. We are taking an innovative approach in the recycling sector, he explained to me one evening as we walked along the river near my apartment. The sunset painted the water in shades of gold and crimson, a backdrop to his enthusiastic gestures. We've developed a method to recycle or compost 90% of the waste we collect. Most companies achieve less than half that. I was impressed by his passion and innovation. He lived by his beliefs, not by appearances or titles. That was one of the reasons I was drawn to him. He was sincere, hardworking, and unlike my mother and Howard, he loved all of me, not just the parts that were convenient or that fit a predetermined mold. He always listened to me and supported my dreams, whether it was my aspiration to become an editor or my desire to write a novel someday. When I introduced him to my father, they hit it off right away, talking for hours about books and environmental issues as if they'd known each other for years. He's a good man, my father later told me, his approval evident in the warmth of his voice. His eyes are full of love for you. Coming from a usually reserved father, this was high praise indeed. Vanessa's wedding. Around that time, my sister Vanessa got engaged. She was 20 years old, still in college studying art as my mother had always envisioned. Her fiance was an investment banker from a good family, exactly the kind of match my mother and Howard had dreamed of for their daughter. Our daughter's wedding will be the celebration of the century, my mother proudly declared over the phone when she called to inform me, not invite me, just inform me. I could hear the satisfaction in her voice, the implicit comparison to my own modest life choices. They hired an expensive wedding planner immediately, sparing no expense to create the perfect event. I was invited, of course. It would look odd if the bride's sister wasn't present, but I was kept at arm's length from the planning process. Vanessa's wedding was lavish and splendid. Hundreds of guests in a grand ballroom, a reception at a luxury hotel, a designer wedding dress that cost more than my annual salary. Everything was perfect, from the cascades of white orchids to the five-tier cake adorned with edible gold leaf. My mother and Howard spared no expense to celebrate the special day of their real daughter. I sat at a table far from the main wedding party, watching the spectacle unfold with a strange detachment. The opulence seemed hollow to me now, a facade that concealed the conditional nature of the love that created it. During the reception, Vanessa found a moment to sit beside me, beautiful in her gown but looking unexpectedly vulnerable. "Are you happy, Rebecca?" she asked, surprising me with her directness. "With your life, I mean." I considered the question, thinking of Nathan, my job, my father, the friends I'd made. "Yes," I answered honestly. "I am." Something like wistfulness crossed her face. "Good," she said, squeezing my hand briefly before being whisked away by another well-wisher. It was a small moment, but it stayed with me. Perhaps Vanessa too was beginning to see beyond the golden cage our parents had created for her. A heartfelt proposal. 3 years later, on a rainy night that drummed against the windows of Nathan's apartment, he invited me to dinner. The living room was transformed with candles that cast a warm glow over the space. A delicious aroma wafted from the kitchen where he had prepared my favorite meal, roasted chicken with rosemary potatoes, a recipe from his mother that he'd spent weeks perfecting. "What's the occasion?" I asked, noticing how he seemed nervous, adjusting the silverware repeatedly and checking his watch. "Can't I just make dinner for the woman I love?" He replied with a smile that didn't quite mask his anxiety. The meal was delicious, but Nathan barely touched his food, pushing it around his plate while maintaining a slightly distracted conversation about our days. As he served dessert, homemade chocolate mousse that wobbled slightly from his unsteady hands, I knew something significant was happening. After serving dessert, Nathan knelt down beside my chair and took out a small velvet box from his pocket. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it, revealing a simple but elegant ring with a small diamond that caught the candlelight. "Rebecca," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "you came into my life like a quiet miracle. You've shown me what it means to love someone completely, with all their strengths and vulnerabilities." He took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving mine. "I want to walk through life with you, to build a future together based on respect and understanding. Will you marry me? Tears blurred my vision as I looked at this man who had shown me what unconditional love truly meant. Yes, I answered through tears that weren't of sadness but overwhelming joy. At that moment, my heart was filled with a happiness I once thought impossible for someone like me, someone who had grown up believing love always came with conditions. However, our engagement news was not received the same way as Vanessa's had been. While Nathan's family celebrated with genuine enthusiasm, hosting an impromptu engagement party the following weekend that filled their house with laughter and congratulations, my mother and Howard's reaction was painfully different. Confronting the past, a few days later, I visited my parents' house for the first time in 3 years to tell them the news. It was my first visit since Vanessa's wedding, an occasion that had highlighted the vast difference in how we were valued within the family. As I drove up the familiar driveway, I felt a strange mixture of emotions, anxiety, determination, and a surprising calm that came from knowing I no longer needed their approval to validate my choices. The house had not changed. The same manicured lawn, the same curtains in the windows, the same polished door knocker. But I had changed in ways that went far beyond the surface. I was no longer a frightened girl, but a woman confident in her own life, secure in the knowledge of her own worth. The realization gave me strength as I rang the doorbell, hearing the same chime that had once signaled my return to a place where I never truly belonged. My mother answered, her surprise at seeing me evident in the slight widening of her eyes. "Rebecca," she said, her tone careful, measured. "This is unexpected." "I have news," I replied simply, stepping into the house without waiting for an invitation. My mother and Howard were sitting in the living room, the television murmuring in the background. Nothing had changed here. The same furniture, the same pictures of Vanessa dominating the walls, the same atmosphere of stifling conformity. I took a deep breath and shared the news of my engagement, watching their faces carefully. "Nathan and I are getting married in the spring," I said, my voice steady despite the rapid beating of my heart. "A garbage collector?" My mother's voice contained clear disdain. Her face twisted with surprise and disgust, as if I'd announced I was marrying someone with a contagious disease. "You're marrying someone like that? He's a wonderful person, Mom," I said, feeling a surge of protectiveness toward Nathan. "He runs his own company. It's an environmentally conscious business that's making real changes in waste management. No matter how you dress it up." Howard interrupted from his armchair, not bothering to stand or offer congratulations. "Ultimately, it's a job that deals with other people's trash." He practically spat the last word, his contempt unmistakable. His words hurt me, but I tried to remain calm, reminding myself that their approval wasn't necessary for my happiness. "He's a wonderful person," I repeated. "You would see that if you met him." However, neither my mother nor Howard was even willing to meet him. In their minds, my engagement was a disgrace that tarnished the family's honor, a poor reflection on them rather than a joyous occasion for me. My mother reached out to look at the engagement ring I was holding up, her face softening momentarily before hardening again. She scoffed at the small diamond, comparing it unfavorably to the massive rock that adorned Vanessa's finger. "Is this your worth?" she said, the words cutting like a knife. "Is my daughter satisfied with such a cheap thing?" I pulled my hand back, my thumb instinctively moving to touch the small diamond that represented not wealth but genuine love. "This is a symbol of love, Mom. It's not about the size." "Love?" My mother laughed, the sound brittle and hollow. "You can't live on love alone. What kind of life will you have with a man who collects garbage?" "You're wrong," I said, a lifetime of suppressed feelings finally finding voice. "Love is the most valuable thing to me. Nathan sees me, really sees me, for who I am, not who he wants me to be. Can you say the same?" My mother's expression turned as cold as ice, her posture rigid with anger and what might have been shame. "We will not attend the wedding," she declared with finality. "I have no intention of showing my face at such a modest gathering of losers." Those words were the last straw. I stood up silently and walked toward the door, my steps steady despite the storm of emotions within me. "Rebecca," my mother called out, her voice sharp with command. "Come back, we're not done talking." I turned around, meeting her gaze directly. "No, we are done. If you're not coming, that's fine." I have people who truly love me. As I closed the door behind me, I held back my tears until I reached my car. My heart ached with a familiar pain, but at the same time, it felt like the final trial in my life's journey, a painful but necessary severing of ties that had bound me to expectations and judgments that were never fair. That night, I called my father. I told him about my engagement and the reaction of my mother and Howard, my voice occasionally breaking as I recounted their cruel words. "Don't worry about it," he said, his voice a balm to my hurt. "They have always tried to impose their values on you, but you have the right to choose your own path, your own happiness." That weekend, my father came to my apartment to meet Nathan. He brought a homemade apple pie, still warm from the oven, and was warmly receptive to both me and my fiance. They talked enthusiastically about environmental issues and books, bonding like old friends despite having met only once before. As the night drew on, my father placed his hand on Nathan's shoulder and said, "Please take good care of Rebecca. She deserves all the happiness in the world." "Yes, I promise," Nathan assured him, his sincerity evident in every word. "She's the most important person in my life." As my father shook hands with Nathan, my eyes welled up with happy tears. Here was my real family, not bound by obligation or appearance, but by genuine care and acceptance. Before my father left, I walked him to his car, the night air cool against my skin. "Dad, do you truly bless our marriage?" I asked, needing to hear the words explicitly. He looked at me earnestly, his eyes reflecting the streetlights. "Does he make you happy?" he asked. "Yes," I answered without hesitation. "Then that's all that matters," he said, pulling me into a hug. "My wish is your happiness. It always has been." His words healed the wounds left by my mother's cold rejection. My real father had shown what a true parent looks like. It was an unconditional love, a love that prioritizes a child's happiness above societal expectations or personal preferences. Wedding preparations. Our wedding preparations proceeded with the help of my father, Nathan's family, and our close friends. It was modest compared to Vanessa's extravaganza, but it was filled with love, genuine love that emanated from every person involved. Nathan's mother helped me choose a simple but elegant dress. His sisters arranged the flowers, and my father insisted on paying for the reception venue, a charming garden with a view of the lake. "Are you sure you're okay with something this simple?" Nathan asked one evening as we reviewed our plans, perhaps remembering the opulence of Vanessa's wedding. "We could always." "This is perfect," I interrupted, squeezing his hand. "It's us. It's real." And Nathan had a surprise. He was actually acquainted with Paul McCartney, whom he had been a fan of since his youth. As it turned out, the former Beatle supported Nathan's environmental activities and had visited his recycling plant the previous year, impressed by the innovative techniques being implemented. "He's coming to our wedding," Nathan told me one evening, his eyes dancing with excitement at being able to surprise me. "Paul McCartney? The Paul McCartney?" I gasped, unable to believe what I was hearing. "You're joking." Nathan laughed, delighted by my reaction. "He's a big supporter of environmental causes, and we've kept in touch. When I told him about you and our wedding, he insisted on coming. Said he wanted to see the woman who captured my heart." On our wedding day, when a black car pulled up at the church entrance and Paul McCartney himself stepped out, all the guests gasped in collective shock. He greeted us warmly, as if we were old friends rather than a young couple he barely knew. "Congratulations, you too," he said, his famous smile as charming in person as on television. "Nathan's work is changing the world. And now I see he's found someone equally special." As a gift, he played a special song for us during the reception, an acoustic version of "Maybe I'm Amazed" that brought tears to my eyes and left our guests in awe. That wonderful moment transformed our modest wedding into an unforgettable celebration that no amount of expensive decorations or five-tier cakes could have matched. My father proudly walked me down the aisle, his arm steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "You look beautiful, Rebecca," he whispered just before we began our walk. "I've never been prouder." Nathan's family tearfully watched our vows, his mother dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, his father standing tall, but with suspiciously bright eyes. In a space filled with love and joy, I truly felt surrounded by family for the first time, not the family I was born into, but the family I had found and that had found me. Social media storm. A few days after the wedding, I uploaded a photo on social media. The picture showed Nathan and I holding hands on the beach with Paul McCartney standing next to us, all three of us smiling broadly in the golden light of sunset. The caption read, "Best day of my life with my true family." The photo was meant to be a simple celebration of our special day, a memory captured to share with friends. I didn't think about how it might be perceived by others, especially my mother and Howard. Hours later, my phone started ringing incessantly. It was a furious call from my mother, followed immediately by an intimidating message from Howard. They were enraged by my post, their anger palpable even through the electronic medium. "You shameless person," my mother shouted over the phone, her voice so loud I had to hold the device away from my ear. "What do you think everyone will say when they see your photo with Paul McCartney making your wedding seem more lavish than Vanessa's?" I was taken aback by the accusation, the unexpected direction of her anger. It wasn't about my happiness or even my marriage, it was about appearances, about how my wedding might be perceived in comparison to Vanessa's. "Paul is Nathan's friend," I answered calmly, though my heart was racing. "He just came to our wedding because he supports Nathan's environmental work." "You are mocking us," she said, her voice trembling with rage. "Delete that post right now." "No," I replied, finding strength I didn't know I had. "This is a record of my happy day, my memories. I won't delete it to soothe your pride." My mother's voice became increasingly menacing. "If you don't change your attitude, you will lose your inheritance." I laughed then, a sound of genuine amusement rather than bitterness. "Mom, I didn't think you had anything left for me, but don't worry, I don't need money. I have true love, true friends, and a real family now." With that, I hung up the phone, feeling lighter than I had in years. The threats that once would have terrified me into compliance now seemed hollow and meaningless. What could they take from me that mattered? I had already found everything of value: confrontation and liberation. That evening, as Nathan and I were preparing dinner in our cozy kitchen, the doorbell rang incessantly. We looked at each other in confusion before I went to answer it. Through the peephole, I saw my mother and Howard standing there, their faces contorted with anger. "It's them," I whispered to Nathan, feeling a momentary surge of anxiety. He squeezed my shoulder reassuringly. "We'll face them together. Let us in," my mother commanded when I opened the door, not bothering with greetings or pleasantries. I stepped aside and led them into the living room, a space Nathan and I had carefully created together, warm, comfortable, filled with books and photographs and the little treasures of our shared life. It was nothing like the sterile perfection of my mother's house, and I could see her eyes sweeping over it with thinly veiled disdain. Nathan came out of the kitchen and stood by my side, his presence giving me strength. He didn't speak, but his hand found mine, our fingers intertwining in silent support. "Delete that post," Howard demanded without preamble, his face flushed with anger. "Why?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "It's a memory of my happy day." "You are embarrassing us," my mother screamed, her composure shattering completely. "Everyone knows how wonderful your sister's wedding was, but Paul McCartney at your modest wedding ruined everything." "Mom," I said quietly, feeling a strange calm descend over me, "this isn't a competition. I am happy, that's all." I shared a photo of a special moment, not to make comparisons or to hurt anyone. "You have always been jealous," she accused, her voice rising in pitch. "Always envious of your sister. Now you're doing this to upset us, to make us look bad." I took a deep breath, feeling Nathan's hand tighten around mine. "Mom, I felt sidelined since I was a child. You've always prioritized Vanessa, my dreams, my hopes, my life. They were never important to you." "Don't be ridiculous," she retorted, her hands fluttering in agitation. "We gave you everything." "It was Dad who gave me everything," I said, the truth flowing freely now. "If it weren't for him, I wouldn't have gone to university. You saved all the funds for Vanessa." Howard's face turned an alarming shade of red. "Enough about your father," he spat. "He was hardly present in your life." "That's not true," I replied, memories of secret meetings and quiet support filling my mind. "He was always there quietly, without you noticing. He supported and believed in me, something you never did." My mother's expression changed then, a calculating look replacing the anger. Being acquainted with Paul McCartney means he's not just a garbage collector, is he? She said with a sinister smile. If you don't want to be disinherited, you better give us some benefit then. We can forget about this. We raised you after all. Just help us out with some living expenses, that's all. I felt a surge of disbelief at her blatant attempt at manipulation. Holding Nathan's hand tighter, feeling his warmth and support, I answered with a clarity that surprised even me. Mom, I have nothing to give you, and I don't want anything from you. Not money, not fake approval. I have a real family now. Nathan and his family, and Dad. They love me unconditionally, for who I am, not for what I can give them or how I make them look to others. My mother's face twisted with a mixture of shock and rage. Are you cutting ties with your family? You will regret this. No, I won't, I said, feeling each word as a truth I'd always known but never fully acknowledged. I have no regrets. This is my life, my choice, and I am happy. Howard glared at me, his contempt palpable. You're ungrateful. Have you forgotten everything we've done for you? I turned to Nathan, suddenly weary of the circular argument, of the accusations that had no basis in the reality I had lived. Nathan, can you ask them to leave? I said softly. Nathan spoke calmly but firmly, his voice steady and authoritative without being aggressive. I think it's best if you both leave now. As Rebecca said, this is our home, our life. Though my mother and Howard were furious, they no longer had the power to control me, to make me doubt myself or my worth. As they stormed out, slamming the door behind them, I felt a true sense of liberation for the first time, as if chains I had carried for decades had finally fallen away. Are you okay? Nathan asked when they were gone, pulling me into a gentle embrace. Yes, I said, surprising myself with how true it was. I really am. Reconnecting with Vanessa, several weeks after the confrontation with my mother and Howard, I received a message from Vanessa. Can we talk for a bit? Just us. Please. The hesitancy in her words was palpable even through the text message. We decided to meet at a small cafe midway between our homes, a neutral territory where we could talk without the shadows of our parents looming over us. I arrived early, choosing a quiet corner table away from the bustle of the lunch crowd. When Vanessa walked in, I was struck by how different she looked from her wedding day, less polished, somehow more authentic in her simple jeans and sweater. Thank you for coming, she said as she sat down, fidgeting with her wedding ring. I wasn't sure you would. Vanessa seemed more composed than I had ever seen her, a quiet dignity replacing the entitled attitude our parents had fostered. As we ordered coffee, I noticed the shadows under her eyes, the slight tension in her shoulders. I'm sorry, she said after our drinks arrived, looking directly at me for perhaps the first time in our adult lives. I always knew how Mom and Howard were treating you, but I never said anything. I was afraid of losing their love. The admission hung between us, heavy with years of unspoken hurt. I understand, I replied, surprised to find I truly meant it. Their love is conditional. You are brave, Vanessa, to acknowledge it. Vanessa smiled tentatively, a small but genuine curve of her lips. I want to be as strong as you, she said. You stood up to them. You built your own life. We talked for a long time that afternoon, the minutes stretching into hours as the cafe emptied and refilled around us. We spoke of past hurts and childhood memories, some shared, many not. We discussed the possibility of a new relationship, one built on mutual respect rather than the hierarchy our parents had created. My husband says I should have stood up for you years ago, she confessed, stirring her third cup of coffee. He doesn't understand why I let them dictate everything. We were both just playing the roles they assigned us, I said, reaching across to squeeze her hand briefly. You the golden child and me the outsider. It wasn't your fault. While a complete repair would take time, that afternoon was the first step toward building a new bond as sisters, one based on choice rather than obligation, on understanding rather than competition. New family dynamics, my relationship with my mother and Howard remained cold, but it was also a relief for me. Free from their control and judgment, I was able to fully accept myself for the first time. The anxiety that had shadowed me since childhood, the constant feeling that I needed to prove my worth, to be enough, began to fade like morning mist. Meanwhile, My relationship with my father deepened. Thomas was always on my side and remained an important part of my family. He and Nathan developed a close bond, often spending weekends working together on renovating our small house or discussing books over beers in the backyard. Your father is an incredible man, Nathan told me one evening as we watched Thomas drive away after dinner. The quiet strength he has, the way he loves you, that's what I want to be as a father someday. Nathan's parents also welcomed me as a daughter, treating me with the same affection and acceptance they showed their own children. For the first time, I lived in an environment filled with unconditional love, where my thoughts and feelings were valued, where I wasn't constantly measuring myself against impossible standards. Rebecca, taste this and tell me if it needs more salt, Nathan's mother would say when I visited, handing me a spoon and genuinely interested in my opinion. We're thinking of expanding the business into compostable packaging, Nathan's father would discuss with me. What do you think? Would the publishing house you work with be interested? These small inclusions, the everyday acknowledgement that I mattered, healed wounds I hadn't even known were still open. Unexpected crisis. A year after the wedding, I was building a stable and happy life with Nathan. His company was successful as a pioneer in environmentally friendly waste management, developing innovative recycling techniques that drew attention from across the industry. I had been promoted at the publishing house where I worked, editing books that inspired and moved readers. Our life was fulfilling, balanced, rich with purpose and connection. One day, an unexpected phone call shook my peaceful days. It was from Vanessa. Her voice trembled on the line, thick with unshed tears. Rebecca, it's serious, she said, her words tumbling out between muffled sobs. Mom and Dad have gone bankrupt. I grabbed the edge of the kitchen counter, steadying myself against the shock. What do you mean? Vanessa started to explain, the words pouring out in a rush of emotion. For years, my mother and Howard had maintained a lifestyle beyond their means to keep up appearances. Luxurious homes in exclusive neighborhoods, expensive cars traded in every 2 years, lavish vacations to destinations they could brag about at dinner parties, all financed increasingly by credit as Howard's real estate business faced setbacks. They had also continued to invest heavily in Vanessa's education and hobbies, determined that she would have the best regardless of cost. Mom always wanted to give me the best, Vanessa said, guilt evident in her voice. Ballet, piano, private schools, summer camps abroad, tuition for a prestigious art university, but in reality, it was far beyond their income. At Vanessa's wedding 4 years ago, they had spent an amount equivalent to a house mortgage, determined to create an event that would be talked about in their social circles for years. However, they did not change their lifestyle afterward and continued living lavishly, ignoring the mounting bills and declining income. The credit card payments became impossible, Vanessa explained. And last week, their house was foreclosed. They had to leave with just what they could pack in their cars. They had lost their home and were temporarily staying with friends, too proud to admit the extent of their financial ruin to most of their social circle. They can't ask anyone for help, Vanessa continued, her voice steadying slightly. Their pride won't allow it. But I can't support them alone. My husband is fed up with their wasteful habits and refuses to bail them out again. I was overwhelmed with complex emotions. For years, my mother and Howard had rejected and scorned me, dismissed my choices, and belittled the man I loved. Now they needed help, the very thing they had denied me throughout my childhood. Let me think about it, I replied, my mind whirling with conflicting thoughts. I need to talk to Nathan. A decision of compassion. That night, I had a long discussion with Nathan. We sat on our back porch, watching the stars emerge as I explained the situation. Nathan listened without interrupting, his face thoughtful in the gathering dusk. What do you want to do? He asked when I had finished, no judgment in his voice. I don't know, I admitted, wrapping my arms around myself against the evening chill. Part of me wants to say it's karma, that they're reaping what they sowed. But another part still cares. Nathan finished for me, understanding in his eyes. Despite everything, I nodded, grateful for his perception. Is that weakness? Nathan shook his head firmly. No, it's strength. The strongest people can choose compassion even when it's not deserved. What would you do? I asked, valuing his perspective. He considered the question carefully. I'd help them, he said finally. Not for them, but for you. So you never have to wonder if you made the right choice. So you never have to carry the weight of retribution. His words resonated with something deep inside me. The cycle of hurt and rejection had to end somewhere. Perhaps it could end with me, with this choice. We have the apartment above the office, Nathan continued. It's small but comfortable, and Howard might not like it, but there's always work at the company if he's willing. A few days later, I mustered the courage to visit where my mother and Howard were staying. The Friends guest house was modest compared to their former home, a stark contrast to the luxury they had surrounded themselves with for decades. I was shocked to see them. My once proud mother looked tired and aged, dressed in simple clothes instead of the luxury brands she had always insisted on. Howard was similarly subdued, the arrogance gone from his bearing, replaced by a defeated slump of his shoulders. There were no traces of their once luxurious life around them, just a few suitcases and boxes of hastily packed belongings. Rebecca, my mother said in surprise when she opened the door, her eyes widening at the sight of me on the threshold. I heard you're in trouble, I said quietly, not sure how to begin after our last bitter encounter. My mother looked away, embarrassment and anger warring on her face. Did Vanessa tell you? Her voice was a mix of resentment and shame. Yes, I acknowledged. She's worried about you. We're fine, Howard blustered from behind my mother, but the hollowness of the claim was evident in his haggard appearance. We'll bounce back soon. That's good to hear, I said, not challenging the obvious lie. But if you need anything, we can help. At those words, tears appeared in my mother's eyes, the first genuine emotion I had seen from her in years. Why? She whispered, the question containing decades of complexity. Because living with hatred is tiring, I said simply. Besides, I chose my words carefully, aware of the fragility of the moment. You're part of my past, part of what made me who I am today. That night, we had a long conversation about past wounds and future possibilities. We didn't reach a full reconciliation. Too much had happened for that to be possible in a single evening. But we made a step toward understanding. Patrick and I offered them temporary housing in an apartment owned by his company. I also suggested a job for Howard in the back office of Nathan's waste management company, handling accounts and paperwork rather than dealing directly with the collection aspects. A job in the waste collection industry? Howard said bitterly when I proposed it, his pride still intact despite everything. It's honest work, I replied evenly. And right now, you need honest work more than pride. He had no other choice, and deep down, he knew it. Howard accepted the offer and, to everyone's surprise, began working earnestly at Nathan's company. My mother adapted to a simpler life with less grace but growing resignation, gradually learning to live without the luxury items she had once deemed essential. Their material losses might have brought about some spiritual growth, some recognition of the hollow nature of the values they had built their lives around. It was too early to tell if the changes would be lasting, but there was a glimmer of potential, a small opening where genuine connection might eventually grow. Epilogue, Reflections. There's no such thing as a perfect family. We all get hurt, make mistakes, and learn from them if we're willing. Helping my mother and Howard wasn't just for them. It was for me as well. By letting go of anger and hatred, I found true freedom, a liberation more profound than any I had experienced before. Not bound by blood but connected by heart, bound not by force but by choice. I had created a family of my own choosing, people who valued me for who I was rather than what I represented or provided. And sometimes, relationships are reborn through forgiveness, not because the past is erased, but because we choose not to let it define our future. Sitting in my study at 45, looking at the framed photos on my desk, Nathan smiling beside me at our 10th anniversary, my father proudly holding our son, Vanessa and I laughing together at a recent birthday celebration, I realize how far I've come. My life journey began with a lack of love, but became filled with an abundance of it. And I learned that family isn't necessarily about where you are born, but where you are most valued. It's about who stays when everyone else leaves, who sees your worth when others are blind to it, who loves you not despite your flaws, but with complete acceptance of them. The greatest gift I've received wasn't the money for university or even the unconditional love of those who chose me. It was the understanding that I am enough, just as I am, a truth that no one can give you, but that you must find within yourself, often through the longest and most difficult of journeys.